Hello, I'm Mike Buchanan, leader of the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. I'm also the conference director. In 2 hours' time, you might like to know, Sargon Avakad is going to join us for an hour's live Q&A, so I think that's going to be a bit special. So this is the penultimate session. I'm joined as a co-host for this session by the highly respected MRA, Terry White, who hopefully we'll see a bit more of his head. There we go. who's been doing some sterling work on his own account and in collaboration with colleagues from Gender Parity UK. We have two wonderful interviewees today, both of whom currently and hopefully permanently identify as women. The first is Debbie Powney, an academic expert in domestic abuse, whose interview and Q&A we had this week. The second is Sally Burris, whose interview and Q&A we also had this week. Sally heads up the initiative Split the Difference. A very warm welcome to you both. Debbie, I think we should kick off with a statement.
Yeah, got a statement here by Brian from the Glass Blind Spot that might clear things up a bit for him, for everyone out there. It says, hello ICMI, and firstly, may I express my sincere apologies to anyone who tuned in this morning expecting to watch a presentation by me. I hope that you will agree that its replacements easily exceed the high standards of quality that I aspire to in my own work. I also need to express my eternal gratitude and thanks to both Deborah and Sally for stepping into the breach at such short notice. Thanks also to Mike and his team for their patience and for facilitating the necessary changes. Regrettably, I have to take the precautionary steps because my employer is currently undertaking a disciplinary investigation into the allegations that content published by the Glass Blind Spot directly conflicts with their work and role. I can't say very much else at this time because the matter is ongoing, but naturally I think it is important that I do say that I entirely reject the allegation. Furthermore, it is my sincere hope that the very vast majority of people who are familiar with my content will agree with my assertion that combating discrimination and promoting equality of opportunity are two aims very much written into the very DNA of every single thing I do. I was fortunate enough to be in the audience at ICMI 2019 when Karen Strawn opened the conference in Chicago by observing that over the years, this important annual gathering of advocates for the human rights of boys and men was robustly withstood the slings and arrows and even bomb threats from those that believe in feminism, social justice warriors, and other associated meanies, lunatics, and doofuses. I also know that many people participating in this and previous ICMIs will themselves have experienced some extremely nasty and nefarious personal attacks, solely because they have had the decency and self-respect to put their heads above the parapet and speak out on behalf of boys and men. And so in the grand scheme of things, I'm relatively philosophical about the fact that I'm unable to fulfill the honour of helping to close this year's conference as a direct consequence of an anonymous caller contacting my employer and making all sorts of false allegations and clearly malicious claims about me. An anonymous caller, by the way, that is almost certainly already under investigation by the police for similar behaviours. Indeed, from a glass half full perspective, I now view this development as extremely fortuitous because it has created the opportunity to provide you all with some early insight into a very important campaign that Split the Difference will be launching in the new year. It's a campaign very close to my heart because it's about combating discrimination and promoting equality of opportunity in my wee country of origin, and hopefully much, much, much farther afield. I urge you to support it in every way that you possibly can. Brian.
Thank you very much, Debbie. An amazing man, and the creator of...
Can I also say an honourable man?
Yes, yes. I think he has for quite some time now been the gold standard of the sorts of videos that he creates. Absolutely astonishing work. The quality just blows me away. How he does it without a professional studio and lots of staff is beyond me. He must invest quantities of time I can barely imagine. And with that, Terry, can I come to you for the first question, please?
Yeah, the Victims Commissioner of England and Wales, Dame Vera Bird, has signalled that she would like to separate men out of the VAUG strategy and run a parallel strategy. This was one of the strategies put forward in your presentation as viable, but Vera Bird is, in my view, a poisonous feminist, and her endorsement raises alarm for me rather than assurance. What are the risks of running parallel but separate male and female victim strategies?
Do you want me to jump in first, Sally?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot to unpick there, because as most things, it's very much more complex than first appears. The first thing is on the surface of it, I completely agree with that strategy, only because the CPS currently categorises all male victims of domestic abuse under a VAUG strategy. And that has direct consequences, because if you make one category part of another category, it diminishes the initial category. So if you take violence against women, boys and men, and put it under the umbrella of violence against women and girls, you completely dissolve the importance of that initial category. What you also enables to do is to make everything about VAUG, because you can't see those strategy and anything to do with that group of violence against boys and men. Now, great on the surface. However, I'm also a great believer, being a psychologist, that an indicator of future behaviour is past behaviour. And the past behaviour is very much people that have sought to diminish the experience of men and boys. So my concern is that they do separate the violence against boys and men, but they also then just hide it in another cupboard somewhere. So it's easier to ignore and really focus on women. Do you have anything to add there, Sally?
I agree with you. We've got about 50 years of women telling us that they're the only people that can deal with women who are experiencing domestic abuse. And we've had 50 years of saying, don't enter in this zone, you have no right. I mean, that's a long time. And I mean, when we launched Split the Difference, the letter to the UN stated that they either, that we wanted them to either be gender specific or gender neutral. And at the time, there's negatives and pluses for both of those ideas. But I understood that the pathways to making change can be bogged down by stuff if it's one way or the other. So it was about collaboration. So basically I was saying, okay, whatever's the easiest thing that you can get it done quickly, do it one way or the other, okay? I don't believe that women being involved in men's needs around domestic abuse should be even allowed on the table. And the reason is because there's hypocrisy in that, but there's a 50-year mistrust. And the only way that they're going to build up credibility in allowing this on the table for men and boys is to actually hand it to them independently. And that's kind of where I sit with it. I don't believe anybody, any women's project, any women's voice can really say,
no,
we're going to absorb this, or we're going to assist this, or we're going to do anything with it. It needs to be handed over to men.
And it has to be said, Vera Baird, the Victims Commissioner, I have never known her ever say so much as one sentence around male victims of anything. She is absolutely the worst kind of vile, powerful feminist imaginable. There's no way that she's suggested taking men and boys out of VAUG with for any reason that will be good for men and boys. So what might be her motivation, do you think?
Well,
I'm sorry.
Go on. You go ahead, Sally.
I mean, what I've noticed over the last 3 or 4 years is there is a definite shift in the narrative and perspective on what men need. That, I mean, the last 18 months, 2 years, definitely. And everybody I speak to says the same thing. We're noticing the shift. At the same time, you start to notice they're trying to promote they can serve men and boys as well. And I think for me, I would be seriously question, is this about money? Is this about holding on to the strings and the power around violence and not allowing anything to go about that? You know,
so it's a defensive move, you think, Sarah?
I think it is. I think it is. I think it's fear in the world shifting so much that massive pot of money is going to get skewed and messed about with, and they're still trying to hold on to control. I really do.
Douglas Wallace.
Can I just pipe in just quickly before we ask Douglas this question?
Yeah.
Because
it wasn't going to be Douglas's question, Terry, but a comment in the chat. But go
on. I see several potential motivations for this. First of all, separating out the strategy would mean that the VORG can be attached to the Istanbul Convention and ratified and subject to international obligations without them having to address male victimization. And that gives it a supremely more powerful position politically to undertake actions. The second, as you mentioned, is the finance. The third is that we are looking at this from the view of victims, but in fact, in addressing the victims, we'll also be looking at perpetrators. And I see parallels to the way that the Respect Toolkit for male perpetrators or male victims, screening them for perpetration first will occur. And I suspect that a strategy that relates to male victims, men and boys, will in fact be predatory to trying to capture these victims as perpetrators rather than as victims. So that's the three main risk points that I see from this.
I mean,
I'd just like to, sorry, just very, very quickly. Douglas Wallace, who's an expert on the UN, says the pressure on the UK will remain to have VORG policies and laws from bodies such as the COE and United Nations. So having a joint policy is rather a pipe dream, and the only answer is to have a violence against men and boys stream. And since you mentioned Istanbul, Terry, only a few people know this, but the next in-person ICMI I shall be hosting is going to be in 2024, 3 years away. I was considering holding it in Eastern Europe, but I'm now leaning to hosting it even further east, the furthest you can go east in Europe, in Istanbul, the capital of Turkey. And what else could that conference
that no longer have it ratified?
No, indeed, which is wonderful. But one of the reasons I like the idea of Istanbul is it's a city so many people want to go to, certainly me, is that we can then call it the Istanbul Convention.
Can I just say, because we have learned so much through what we're doing right now, but there are many people hopefully that will see this that won't understand the pathways. And often we get lost in thinking everybody should know, but they may not. So for those who are not very aware, there's a convention called the Istanbul Convention, which basically is about protecting violence against women and girls. It's a worldwide promoted...
Europe-wide.
Europe-wide. Well, if you look at the policies that are not in Europe, though, Terry, they adopt the same policy, even though they don't need to. They push them the same way. Yeah. So I agree with you and I understand, but there are countries that are working by the convention anyway. So what it means is that convention influences the United Nations, pushes within all governments in lots of different ways to adopt policies, that create legislation and adopt policies and guidance that will then influence how women and girls are treated in terms of domestic abuse. But it doesn't just sit with domestic abuse. Those policies integrate within education, health, housing, family court, criminal court. The list is endless. I looked at 21 in the UK and saw evidence of that in every single one. So the impact on this is that you've got pretty much a whole world that is governed around women and girls. So you've got CEDAW, and then you've got this. It's very important that the way this is done, make sure that it is in the hands of men and boys and their needs, and it is not tied into anything that women who have had 50 years to get to this point, then make the decisions for men and boys. This is not right.
I would argue that we haven't yet ratified the Istanbul Convention officially. I would argue that we have by stealth, because of all the, if anyone wants to go and read the Istanbul Convention, this will all become blatantly clear that you have to have specific strategies for violence against women and girls across the spectrum, like you've said, Sally. You also have specific commissioners or people in place that are to drive this, and we know we've got victims commissioners time and time again that say absolutely nothing about male victims, and more importantly, nothing about the victims of female perpetrators. That has become abundantly clear over the last couple of weeks, when we've seen several severe sentencing for women that have murdered or neglected children to the point of death. And though the silence has been deafening. However, having come from industry in a previous life, one of the things that made me sick to my stomach, and that is not a drama-seeking statement, is in Article 4 of the Istanbul Convention. It contains the most dangerous exclusion clause of any contract I have ever read or written, because it says, it goes through just before that article about how no one can be disadvantaged, whether it's sex, religion, creed, race, so on and so forth. There's an enormous list of all the different things that are considered, and then in the very next breath it says, but anything that's put in place to do with this convention doesn't actually get included in all that. So
Yes.
It's one of the most absurd and dangerous and actually vulgar elements of any, and it is a contract. You can call it what you want. It's a contract.
Yeah.
It's one of the most vulgar things I've ever seen. And the danger is that if we ratify that, things that this presentation was about, this notion that all of a sudden we go from having an inclusive policy, which Northern Ireland does have currently. It talks about victims. That's it. It doesn't talk about gender. It doesn't talk about a specific strategy. It talks about victims. And to me, when I first got involved in this collaboration, it was a really bright silver lining in an otherwise very, very dark and stormy cloud. And as far as I'm concerned, this is an attempt to ratify Northern Ireland's inclusive policy into an exclusionary policy.
Can I just say we have on our YouTube channel a speech given by Philip Davis, I think perhaps a couple of years ago, in which he spoke at length about the Istanbul Convention and just tore it apart in the way that only Philip can. He asked, or his staff approached the London embassies of every country that had ratified the Istanbul Convention, and asked them what had been the impact on domestic violence rates, and not one of them could say they had reduced. And
can I also say something really crucial to that? And it's something that is really it's become so encompassing for me that it's in danger of becoming my next tagline, as I do. I have spoken to hundreds of victims. I have data on thousands of victims of domestic abuse, and as a survivor of male perpetrated domestic abuse, I've also had a lot of input, chatting, talking on and off record with female victims of domestic abuse, and you can imagine me, I've asked them all sorts of questions about how to help their experience. And let me tell you something absolutely concrete. Not one of those female victims said to me, my life would be made better if we ignored male victims. Not one. Not one of them said it has to be specifically about women in order to help me. So where they get this notion from that it's helpful if it's gendered, it's more productive if it's gendered, quite frankly, and excuse my language, particularly on a Sunday morning, is bullshit.
It is. He finished off his speech by he finished off his speech by saying, you can imagine a situation, the day after if Parliament ratified the Istanbul Convention, the day after, there's a man who's about to batter his wife, is about to batter his wife, and says, and he's about to punch her. He says, "Oh, hold on a minute. I read in the paper this morning that we ratified the Istanbul Convention. I'm sorry, love. Can I make you a cup of tea?"
Yeah, in Philip's manner, that is such a pertinent point for those that, and I'm not trying to teach anyone to suck eggs here, but that's the absolute truth. Ratifying this convention only helps those that benefit or
profit.
As Terry says, and it's a line I've stolen but absolutely attributed to him. It's very much ratifies this notion that those with a vested interest are mistaken for experts. That's what it ratifies.
Indeed.
It ratifies their personal belief system and their financial investment into something that is designed to help no victim.
Right. Well, I mean, it's not such investment as profiteering, naked profiteering from lives. I wonder if I could come on to something that struck me in the film, and which you and I had a quick chat about before we went live, Debbie. There's a woman, I think she was a politician, but I may be wrong on that, who said that 12 women and 1 man have died in Northern Ireland at the hands of partners. I wonder if you could say something about who's excluded from those stats.
Well, I mean, firstly, the atom of my body despises this narrative based on that particular sentence, which is everything is set up as a competition. And you don't find that in any other aspect of public policy or healthcare. No one ever would be as vulgar to stand up and say, well, we need to have violence, a safety for men and boys in suicide, because it's far more important, far more men do it, it's far more impactful on men. No one would ever do it. No one would even, well, I'm certainly hope no one I know would ever think that about rejecting 25% of people that commit suicide that are women. I think we tackle that as a suicide issue, and we know that it affects men and boys, and we have to have a focused strategy, but it's not exclusionary. What we have here is someone. Can you imagine if the family of that man is watching that, where a public servant says, well, 12 women were killed, and that's clearly important, but that 1 man, well, that just puts it into perspective. I think it's dismissive on a very level, a surface level. But beyond that, what it does is it's very good at cherry picking, because I spoke to Brian about this, and he's done a lot of research into the issues with Northern Ireland, and actually over a 10-year period, which is also a measure used by Respect in mainland UK for their average of 2 women a week. Over a 10-year period in Northern Ireland, men and women tend to come across as being equally murdered by their intimate partner. So there's that. Really? First. Yeah. That's what Brian tells me. If I'm wrong, I'm happy to be wrong, because I'm not the expert in Northern Ireland by any stretch of the imagination. However, the other thing that really irks me when I hear that is that it doesn't include children. So it doesn't include girls in that might have been murdered in domestic abuse, which we've seen over the last couple of weeks, where if anyone's been privy to the UK sentencing of women that have tortured, starved, broken bones, and essentially murdered children, boys and girls. So again, this narrative is very much a cherry picking. So it's focusing purely on adults. So in this instance, there isn't a violence against women and girls here. There's only a violence against women strategy. So yes. I know it sounds very subtle when I say all these things, but if you add up all the subtleties, you'll see that it's a tyranny of cherry picking to fit a particular narrative at a particular time. And it's very quickly to change that when it comes to talk about other issues. So, and we see this repeated over and over and over again in the domestic abuse framework that matches our domestic abuse bill that's just gone to ascension in mainland UK, well, England and Wales. You'll see that although the actual law is written in a gender neutral way, you'll see that the framework, which is how this
Guidance.
law is enacted, is absolutely gendered, to the point where it has a lovely Duluth wheel smack in one of the pages. But it also starts, and this is an example, and I want everyone to take this away, that you'll see the Office for National Statistics shows that X amount are women, usually 1.6 million, and 786,000 men are victims of domestic abuse. So here it states 1 in 3 men are the victims of domestic abuse, with no campaigns, no awareness raising, anything else. And then just underneath, literally within a couple of paragraphs, it says 92% of all convictions for domestic abuse are male, which is true, but you have to understand that in psychology terms, that's priming. That doesn't show the prevalence of domestic abuse. That shows to me a gender bias in how many people are arrested, how many people are prosecuted, and ultimately how many people are sentenced for domestic abuse. So it just shows me another element of gender bias. But in this instance,
can I just sorry, Debs, I think we need to move on, but
sorry, you know me.
That's okay. A couple of quick points. The woman, of course, failed to mention that the majority of children who are killed by a parent are killed by the mother, not the father. And there's also an issue which I was about to raise, which Douglas put very well. Street homelessness, being a male victim of domestic violence is a major driver of street homelessness, which reduces life expectancy by an average of 30 years.
Yeah.
And Douglas says, nor do these statistics allow for the number of people who commit suicide as a result of domestic violence.
Yeah, we were talking about
those numbers dwarf the number of women killed by men by a factor of God knows what, 100, I would think.
Well, currently there's
20 to 1.
Yeah, there's various numbers that are speculated about, because obviously it's not something that's been collated. I would push that we really need to add history, personal history to coroner's reports and police reports that has some kind of way to start recording why people become homeless. In general, men in particular, because the numbers that are affect men, and the reasons why, because of our social expectations that when there's a divorce of any kind, a man will leave the house. But that is not in any way to exclude women that are homeless. No. I do not want to get into that realm.
But the sheer fact that data is not gathered is very telling, isn't it? I mean, if 9 out of 10 street homeless were women, my God, that data would be collected.
But the reality of it is, and again, I have a particular personal vested interest in suicide and what we do to tackle that. For those that don't know, because I lost my brother to suicide, and it was when we had his the hearing about his death. It was brief, to say the least, where a doctor came in and said he has a history of anxiety and depression, therefore we'll sign it off as anxiety and depression. There's a number of factors that I don't have to go into at this point. If anyone wants to talk to me about it offline, I'm happy to. But of course you're going to be depressed if you're homeless and you're sleeping on the streets and you're freezing cold and you're in danger every day and you can't have a wash and you can't eat. Of course you're going to be depressed, but that is a consequence of your circumstances, not necessarily the reason for your circumstances. Okay, and that's my issue.
Yeah, I'm just going to try and move things on a bit, because there was some questions from Douglas that we want to deal with. And I also want to first highlight a comment by Douglas, which was getting back to the issue of distinct policies. The problem with distinct policies is that most DV is bidirectional and doesn't fit into the perpetrator-victim model at all. And yes, we can see that as a complication if you try and split out two victim groups. They're going to be arguing on who's the perpetrator of this.
Yeah, but that's I saw that recently on social media, where I think someone's put out a survey or something. I was tagged into something yesterday that says what? Oh, it was Dr. Barnett. She was asking what changes need to happen in the family court, and I've got a view on that from both a professional and personal perspective. But It's the idea that there was a comment in there that said a number that said getting absolute proof of who the perpetrator is, and then they would go based on the Vogue strategy. So that, you know, they've already had the bias to that. But often, you're absolutely right. The most common form of domestic abuse is bi-directional, and also within that, there's a lot of couples that actually want to stay together. They've both come into it, and actually, this is bizarre. It's controversial of me to say this, but they are violent or abusive or controlling or whatever to each other for different motivations than power and control, which again is an umbrella term that is nonsense. These people might have issues from backgrounds, issues of mental health, issues of addiction, issues of stress, emotional regulation, whatever that is, and they just need help. They actually do love each other, but they need help to cope with ordinary everyday conflict and issues of intimate relationships that we all have, but in these situations might be exaggerated or by issues that people have bought into the relationships with them.
But of course,
Baggage, for want of a better phrase.
but of course, I mean, for the women involved, whether the violence is bi-directional or they're the sole perpetrator, there is no help for them. And
yeah,
you know,
sorry, Sally, I'm going to shut up and let Sally.
No,
I was just going to say, not only women. I mean, women suffer from that. The men suffer, children suffer, and sometimes female partners. You know, the level of violence in lesbian couples. I think it's at the top of the tree, isn't it, Debbie?
Yeah, I think you know my view on this. I go through this in detail about how I think this narrative fails everybody. And I remember, give you a bit of personal insight. I was in court. I was pulled into court longer than I was married with my ex-partner. That is absolutely legal and administrative abuse. I know it by first-hand experience. But when I finally won, I spent at least half of the time I was dragged through court, litigants in person representing myself. And I had fantastic IDVAs supplied to me by Women's Aid. I have to say that the people that helped me were absolutely spectacular people. But there was one thing that really dampened the experience. And to give you some perspective, my ex-partner was removed from my house the 1st of January 2012. And the final hearing that I had was the judgment was handed down in March 2018. I'd actually been single for a number of years and remarried at that point. So this isn't something that was just a year in its undertaking. But the thing that really disappointed me is when I'd won and I'd put a great deal of work and effort and stress and blood and tears, there is no doubt about it, into this. When I won, my IDVA, who was spectacularly supportive, said to me, "It's brilliant that a woman has won." And that really annoyed me, because it's not because I was a woman, it's because I put so much bloody work into this, and how I structured my evidence, how I'd sat down and pulled myself through the stress and, you know, sleepless nights and lack of eating and everything, and all the money I'd spent on it. It was my effort in doing that, not because of my gender, because of my bloody hard work. And so that's my view on the gender narrative, that telling a woman she's a victim because she's a woman is harmful. She's a victim because she happens to be heterosexual in a relationship with a man that is abusive to her. A man is a victim of domestic abuse because he happens to be a female domestic abuse because he happens to be heterosexual in a relationship with a woman who happens to be abusive. Having this one issue, one faceted variant issue of domestic abuse, reduces scientific curiosity and prevents actual real life useful solutions, so that everybody in that is helped. And I don't see any perpetrator some of them I would probably say are never going to be helped, but they're not intrinsically evil. If you start labeling someone evil because they're a man and innocent because you're a woman, you're verging into the territory of maladaptive religion.
Yeah, very much so. I wanted to get a question in before we have to close down, and this goes back to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland currently has the most gender inclusive system for managing domestic abuse in the UK, but it is not experiencing disproportionate victimisation for either gender. So why would they now require a specific VOG strategy focusing on women and girls?
I'm going to take a breath so Sally can maybe get.
Terry, can you repeat that question? Forgive me for asking you to do that. I'm so sorry.
Northern Ireland currently has the most gender inclusive system for managing domestic abuse in the UK. But it is not experiencing disproportionate victimisation of either gender. So why would they now require a specific VOG strategy focusing on women and girls?
I think Deborah hit on it before about ratifying and about having a collab, you know, each section of the UK is knitted together with the same voice. I think Northern Ireland has always been the one thing that has been an Achilles heel for the women's movement in terms of domestic abuse financing and money. I've noticed the main players in supplying women's services become more and more fixated on finances, money and control in terms of legislation and that sort of that environment of making sure they cover all bases. For example, they've been paying particular attention to BAME and pushing asylum through the government as well. And I think it's just been one of those areas that has kind of been on their list anyway. They've seemed to have managed to do lots of meetings behind the scenes and have set it up actually where there was a new team member in place, and I think it just captures it. I think it's just been the Achilles heel, and they don't want to let it go. You know, when I always get this picture when I see these things happening of a group of women who are very extreme in their attitude, holding on to a cliff face at the moment, and I've seen it more and more over the last 18 months. And I think, you know, I mean, let's be honest, if we saw one area that was likely to be, you know, something that could take over or push the men's movement forward more, that's the one thing. In terms of strategy, I would be focusing on Northern Ireland. I wouldn't want to be letting that actually turn the whole of the UK around and promote this for men and boys. I'd be targeting them before anything else, to be honest. And I think that's what they're doing.
I was really surprised when I looked at the Northern Ireland, when I saw the presentation, and there was this big focus on Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act, and suggesting that this gave Northern Ireland some sort of special protection. But when you compare it to the Equality Act of England and Wales, the Northern Ireland Act, the Section 75 is only due regard, which is reflected also in the Equality Act. And the Section 76, which is a prohibition on discrimination, only refers to religious beliefs and politics, whereas the equivalent in the Equality Act includes sex. So it doesn't seem to be that Northern Ireland is in this position of being sort of like the outlier because of a different legal structure. In fact, it should be the opposite. Is there something about Northern Ireland that's a uniqueness about the culture of Northern Ireland that has meant that it has been the last place to succumb to this?
Well, I think it's because it had bigger fish to fry. You know, it had a sectarian political background that has otherwise referred to as the Troubles, which I've learnt from via my father and extended family. So it understands the dangers of division. So here we are again, where there's an inclusive policy here that is in danger of causing division on what Brian quite brilliantly wrote is a natural fault line. This is only a natural fault line to those of a specific belief system. And nevertheless,
no, go on. Sorry, I shouldn't.
Oh no. So for me, whatever the outcome of what happens to Ireland, and I would fight tooth and nail to keep it as an inclusive strategy. I mean, to be honest, it's not even based on a natural fault line. It's based on one specific group of victims, which is adult heterosexual females. It doesn't actually look at all the other victim groups within that. So it's exclusive to the point that we are in England and Wales. But what will be interesting is if they do go ahead and suddenly enact a specific violence against women and girls strategy, it'll be interesting, and I will monitor it with an absolute microscope if that actually has any reduction on the domestic abuse victims, whether that be in prevalence or impact. And it better be bloody good, because I will be reporting on it on an annual basis that says this strategy has negated this and this is what it's done. Because the one thing I will actually hand on heart predict is that it will stop men coming forward. It will become a barrier for male victims. It will become a barrier for LGBT victims. It will become a barrier for any victim that doesn't fit their template of what they consider.
Can I just say as well, for me, one of the things that I'd contemplated is the UK is very well respected for lots of different reasons in lots of different countries across the world. The Istanbul Convention is not, Istanbul is not the only country now that's now exploring leaving the convention. There's a number of other countries. Poland, I think Italy is the last one now, over the last couple of weeks, that have said that they're not happy and they're considering leaving as well. The UK, it threads itself in lots of countries across the world, but Northern Ireland, it's got a strong identity in its own right. For example, its relationship with America is a lot stronger. There are other European countries that it's a lot stronger. I'm not saying for 1 minute that that this is why Women's Aid are now completely focusing on that. But when you've got countries that are stepping out of Istanbul as a convention and saying actually it's because it's causing competition within the communities, it's destroying families and the makeup of families. And then you've got Northern Ireland that's knitted in these other countries. I mean, if they were looking at global issues, because they do, I don't know whether everybody knows this, but domestic abuse actually links a lot of drivers in every single country. There's evidence that it doesn't take a lot to look at it. So it is, yeah. So I wonder whether some of that's in play as well. I mean, I think there's a recipe. There's a recipe going on about why they need to target and why they need to do it the way they're doing, because it looks like some of the stuff they're doing is quite covert, is backroom meetings.
Yeah.
And I think there may be lots of reasons for that, especially when they want to ratify. They wanted to ratify in October. The beginning of the year, we had lots of public releases around making sure we are ready now. We just need to do it. We're going to do it in October, and it's still not done. So I think, I think there's multiple reasons. I don't think there's one.
It was a good day for me when Turkey pulled out of the Istanbul Convention. That was a good day.
Douglas Wallace asked, with MP corruption still in the public mind, are the public ready to realise the corruption in hiring experts whose advice will lead to those same experts gaining large chunks of public money?
Who knows? There's, as much as we're very aware of political corruption, or very much one rule for me, another for thee, there's still a huge amount of people that don't want to face the truth, or are very happy with the status quo for whatever reason, that may be. So for me, it depends on a couple of things. It depends on the appetite for change, but it also depends on what you consider to be an expert.
Yeah,
and how they position themselves, because as someone who has, in inverted commas, lived experience in this area, and someone who has spent her life, well, at least like 7 years of her life studying this on an academic level, I still irk when someone refers to me as an expert, because you'll know that the further you delve into something, the more you realize how little you know. So it's I still find it difficult to attach expert to myself. But I think again, you need to have, I would say, if we're talking about courts, for example, we tend to have this issue where you have to agree, both sides, and it is sides, it's an adversarial issue, have to agree on an expert. I would say there's nothing wrong in disagreeing on an expert and having your own expert to put your view across to the judge, because more often than not, because the field is flooded with those that have a VOG perspective, what is wrong in saying, okay, well, if you want to have a VOG specialist in here because you're a barrister or a solicitor that is representing a woman, I think the other side should be allowed to have another key or expert witness in that situation to offset or add to that situation, or even confirm, you know, because as much as I fight for the gap in what I perceive to be a gap in the knowledge, which is around male victims, I also am very aware that women are abused, and I stand for women as much. So if I was called into a situation where both sides were fighting, I hope I would, and I know I would strive to base my decision on evidence rather than belief.
There's a good speech.
Sorry, just a couple of comments from Robert Brockway, who very ably hosted the Australian leg of this conference. He says, "I'm so happy to see reciprocal partner violence being mentioned so often. For many years, I was concerned we weren't raising this enough. Reciprocal PV destroys the Duluth model." Quite right too.
Very true.
One of the key indicators of whether a woman will be a victim of IPV is whether she is a perpetrator of IPV. Someone interested only in the welfare of women should still be concerned for women's violence.
Yes.
Very good.
I'm gonna slightly correct that. One of the biggest indicators of a woman being harmed in domestic abuse is that she instigates domestic abuse. That doesn't necessarily mean that she's the only person in there using domestic abuse or control or whatever. It's that she might be the first instigator in that.
Yeah, we had a Scottish guy called James Mackey give a presentation and have a live Q&A, and in his book he talks about his ex-partner inviting him to punch her.
Yeah,
and she actually said, because I will destroy you if you do that. No, please punch me, because know the consequences.
And Mike, that I've had that exact experience.
Yeah, many people have.
Yeah,
it's a common thread.
Yeah, can I just say though, I mean, what Debs was saying, and what lots of people who work out in frontline services know, is that the people that perpetrate violence are playing something out, whatever that is. It could be a history of violence growing up, it could be trauma they've experienced, but they are playing something out within their role and they're testing something. Women who instigate violence, it may be because that's the lifestyle they know, and their risk management systems internally know how to deal with relationships like that. And it's almost like a waiting game. You know, it's a bit like poking the bee's nest, you know, that's the kind of element to it. Some would say it's because of control, and they're controlling the situation they feel that they don't have control over just by poking the bee's nest, so to speak. But there are reasons behind that. There are reasons why people perpetrate. And the best form of support for that is to stop the perpetrating and look at the cause. I mean, there are programs out there that can help families. It's just unfortunately the Duluth model has swamped the market, and everybody and their auntie believes that's the only way to go. But it isn't, you know.
I think David Eggins and Denise Knowles, I mean, run about just about the only female perpetrators, you know, courses which include female perpetrators in the country. There is no, as far as I know, there's not a single penny of taxpayers' money going into this.
Yeah, that's right. There are other models, but taxpayers don't. Nobody's paying for them at the moment. There are therapeutic interventions.
And isn't that a tragedy that we're allowing women to live a life of violence without giving them the support that they need? Because I imagine that most of those women are. When we're looking at criminal justice, we also really look at vulnerabilities, and more often than not, any perpetrator of crime will be vulnerable in various aspects that have been swept up in that and everything else. And the same absolutely applies to domestic abuse. Vulnerabilities are key to cracking this. Exactly. And I imagine there are a percentage of men that believe that they have a patriarchal right to do that. But that doesn't mean that patriarchy is the only answer, or indeed a dominant answer to cracking this nut. But as often is the case, how much do those people whose mortgages depend on domestic abuse existing, how much do they really want this cause to be cracked and solved? I was thinking about this as a reflective piece on myself, actually, because my life is invested in this. Absolutely 24/7. You know, most people know that if you ask me a question, you better make sure you've got at least 3 exits, because I will try and corner you and talk to you about this at length. But what would I do if we solved domestic abuse? I'm a researcher. I could move on to other things. I would do other things. I would move on to the next big nut in my armory of things that I want to crack. It would fill me with absolute joy to be redundant in this area. I'm not sure a lot of people have that, or have that self-reflective, critical analysis of their own motivations in this field, and I wish more people did.
I think you're absolutely right, Debbie. The female chief executives of Refuge and Women's Aid both earn something like 2 to 3 times more money than the Prime Minister. It would, you know, if you could press a button today and stop domestic violence in the UK, it'd be an absolute disaster for these people.
Well, I did a back of an envelope.
So it's like the rape industry. You know, the women in that, they'd be unemployed.
Well, I did when we had the first draft of the domestic abuse bill, where it actually does mention male victims and assigns them the grand total of £500,000 to help them. I did a back of an envelope, two back of the envelope calculations. One was, if we divide that 500,000 by the known victims to the Office for National Statistics, male victims, I think it worked out about 72 or 74 pence per victim that currently exists in the Office for National Statistics. And when I added in the 20 million to the female victims, that was still only £5.60 something for female victims, but still a vast amount more in ratio terms than male victims on an individual level. But then what I also did is I added up the salaries of the Victims Commissioner, the head of Refuge, the head of Women's Aid, I think the head of Respect, and the Domestic Violence Commissioner's salaries. And those 5 women on a basic salary level, no pensions, no bonuses, no anything else, had a grand total of £536,000. So between 5 women running this industry, they had more money than 786,000 male victims were apportioned.
Yes, that's extraordinary.
That's a nice.
And I think on that note, Debbie, I think we'll have to end. Sadly, our time is up. Absolutely fascinating discussion, as I knew it would be. So my sincere thanks, Debbie, to you for this and all your contributions to this conference, and Sally likewise, especially the 2 days of co-hosting. That was beyond the call of duty, to put it mildly.
No, it was a great pleasure. It was a great pleasure.
And thank you, Terry, for your contributions to this conference. It's been great having you as a co-host. My thanks to all the attendees, especially those who have put some wonderful questions. So that's it for there's nothing happening in the next hour, but at 1 o'clock GMT, in an hour's time, we have Sargon of Akkad. So I think that's going to be a pretty special Q&A, and look forward to plenty of people there. And it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from everyone else here.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.